Howdy YouTube. Been saying for a while now that I need to do something about the dust collection in my shop. Sitting over there in the corner is the 2-horse Harbor Freight dust collector. I've got a video elsewhere on the channel about converting that into a 2-stage dust collector system, and it works reasonably well. But you do have to have it hooked up to the tool for it to function. And at the moment, the table saw is the only thing that I actually have it connected to. And at that, my connection to the table saw is with Harbor Freight hose, which is awful stuff, and clamps that require a screwdriver to do anything with. So moving that connection from the table saw to anywhere else is just not really a viable option. And that's what this is supposed to solve. Believe it or not, in this 4-foot-long box is 50 feet of 4-inch flexible duct. Comes to me by way of Amazon.com from the folks at PSI Woodworking in Philadelphia. And in addition to the hose, I got a couple of other goodies here. I got a Y fitting. I got a coupler that lets me attach the hose here and have a quick disconnect on the other end. And I got some clamps that have nice big thumb screws on them so it doesn't require a tool to get them on and off. So not a real complicated project today. Basically what I want to do is I want to hook this up to the separator and put this on the end so that I have a long flexible hose that I can drag around from tool to tool. The table saw is already set up with a connection that this should just slip onto. But the bandsaw, we need to take this and probably some of that crappy Harbor Freight hose and build us a single point to connect to both of the dust ports on the bandsaw. Over here in the corner is the dust collector, and that Y fitting is the inlet to the separator. I had the table saw connected to the bottom, and I suppose I could have just put my new hose on the top, but I don't have any blast gates, certainly none that are any good. So I think what I'm going to do for right now is just hook up the long flexible hose and move it back and forth between the table saw and the bandsaw. When I get a couple of more tools in here that are going to require hookup to the dust collector, like a joiner or planer or something like that, then I'll come back probably and think about putting in some permanent plumbing and using both of those inlets. Right off the bat, I got to tell you, I'm pretty stoked about how flexible this PSI hose is. The Harbor Freight stuff, especially in this cold weather like we're having here in the Northeast, you couldn't bend that stuff almost without tools to help you do it. It's also pretty darn smooth on the inside for this style of hose. All of the wiring and the bends and lumps and such things are on the outside, so you should get much better airflow through this hose than I did through the old stuff. Hey, and for once I actually remembered to put the hose clamp on the hose before I put it on the pipe. Okay, first end is in. I love the thumb screws on those hose clamps. It's not as fast as a screwdriver in your drill, but it also doesn't strip out. Before I can hook the other end up to the bandsaw, I have to remove the temporary job that I did right here. This is a 4 to 2.5 inch adapter that allowed me to plug the shop vac hose into the first of the 2 dust collection ports on this bandsaw. It turns out that doesn't work very well, and it's something I've gotten a lot of questions about. Why do you have both the dust collector and the big shop vac set up there next to each other in the corner? I think it's worth 2 minutes to take a side trip and talk about that. All right, shop vac v dust collector. Why do you need both? What is the difference? When would you use each one? Okay, starting with the dust collector, this thing is designed to do one thing and one thing only, and that is move a lot of air, as much air as possible for the size of the motor. And one of the assumptions that the engineers make when they're designing a dust collector is that there's going to be relatively little resistance to moving all of that air. That's why dust collectors are hooked up to big boxes of machines, table saws, band saws, things like that, and they're hooked up with big diameter hose, 4-inch and up. All of that is designed to offer as little resistance as possible to the flow of all of that air to the dust collector. If there is a lot of resistance to the airflow, then the effectiveness of a dust collector just plummets. As you start going to smaller hose or you get machines that don't have a good way to get replacement air into them, a dust collector just has no way to fight against that resistance to the airflow in the system. But when you hook a dust collector up properly to tools that are well designed for dust collection, it moves mountains of air and therefore collects mountains of dust, including the little fine stuff. A shop vac is designed around exactly the opposite set of assumptions. It's designed around the idea that it's going to be really, really hard to get the air to move in the situations where you're using this vac. Usually the use case is you've got something that looks like this stuck to your concrete floor, right? Either that or maybe you've put one of these pointy things on the end of it so you can get down into some crack or crevice. Bottom line is that a shop vac almost never is operating in a situation where there's a clear and unobstructed path to airflow. So shop vacs are designed to generate a very high, what's known as static pressure. In other words, they're designed to fight against all these different kinds of resistance. And that's what makes them a much better fit for collecting dust from tools that don't have big openings. Hand sanders, routers, jigsaws, things with little tiny ports that are pressed close up against the wood so that there's just nowhere for a lot of replacement air to come from. So that high static pressure sounds like a desirable quantity in any kind of a vacuum type device. Say, why don't they do that for the dust collectors? Well, it's because that all else being equal, if you have a fan, that's really what these things are, that's designed to generate a high static pressure, if you put it in a situation where it doesn't need that, it has a big open air path, it's not going to move nearly as much air as something that's designed to work in the unrestricted case. So in a nutshell, can fight against obstructions and move air even when it's hard to do at the expense of not moving much air, can move tons of air, but only if it's a relatively easy thing to do. Okay, with that out of the way, I can start assembling the fitting that's going to connect both of these dust ports together. I'm using the old Harbor Freight gray hose because I don't want to cut up the new one, and because I actually want stiff hose for this part of the job. The other dust port connects the same way with another piece of the leftover hose. Okay, my quick release fitting is in the end of the hose. The fitting is from Woodstock International, and it's okay. It seems to fit in there all right. It could have been maybe 1/8 of an inch bigger to fit this particular hose, but one of the interesting things about 4-inch dust hose is that it's 4 inches sort of a average, if you will, so they were probably right to go a little on the small side. Moment of truth. Well, it seems pretty good. All right, I went and grabbed a useless hunk of 2x4. Let's turn this thing on and see if it sucks, or if it sucks. All right, so if we take a look inside of this thing, here's the bottom of it. There you can see in the center of the frame is the bottom dust port. And that thing is pretty squeaky clean. It wasn't spotless when I started because I did some bandsawing before I hooked this thing up. I'm pretty happy with that. That's a 20-foot run of hose to a Harbor Freight dust collector, and that's not going to have to be cleaned out very often. Well, that's great when you're using it, but what about when you're not? I cut the 50 feet of hose down to 30 feet. That's enough to get me pretty much anywhere in this garage, but it's still a lot of hose to deal with when you're not using it. What to do? That's what you do. All right, I said I didn't have any blast gates. I lied, I have this one. This is a Harbor Freight special. It comes in that kit that they sell of dust collection accessories, a couple of pieces of hose and blast gates and clamps and what have you. That entire thing is to be avoided at any cost. The hose is terrible and these blast gates leak and they don't stay open and they have no redeeming qualities whatsoever, except that if you can figure out how to get it to stay open, it makes a pretty good 4-inch to 4-inch hose coupler. And that's what we're going to use it for. I'm going to take this gate, drill a couple of holes in it, screw it to the table saw so that I can have a coupling that I can get at with my flexible hose, because the one that's actually on the saw is square up underneath the middle of the bottom. I'm ultimately going to need a 9/32 hole for these 1/4-inch bolts to go through, but I'm starting off with just a 1/16 of an inch. I'm going to make the holes in here and then use this as a template to mark where I need to drill on the table saw. That way I get nice, accurate center points for the larger bit so it won't wander around on the metal. Okay, well, with any luck you can see what's going on here. These are the holes I drilled in the table saw that match up with the holes in the blast gate. And here is the hose that comes down from underneath the saw where the dust collection actually attaches. So you see how this blast gate won't stay open by itself. That's just real handy when you're trying to use it as a blast gate. If I had mounted this thing lower on the saw, I could have left myself more room to get at this thumb screw, but fortunately I only have to do this once. And some of you were sitting there going, hey, wait a minute, those are not the screws he had on a minute ago. Yeah, you're right, those were too short. These are the only other 1/4-inch screws I had that are long enough. When you throw stuff away, always save the hardware. These used to be a bed. There we go. Good and solid, and you couldn't close that gate if you wanted to. Okay, I'm pretty stoked. Dust collection on the bandsaw and the table saw, and I'm now set up for a movable hose, so as I add tools that need dust collection, I just move the hose. This stuff is really, really awesome. I love this hose. Now, granted, my basis for comparison is probably the worst hose ever made, but it's very, very reasonably priced. If you get the black, it's only a little bit more than $1 a foot. Comes in clear, it's significantly more expensive if you absolutely positively have to see your dust going to the collector, but you can do it. Time will tell about the durability of this hose getting dragged around the shop, but I have a relatively smooth concrete floor, and this is 6 or 8 mil vinyl on here, so it should hold up all right. You've seen me toss useless Harbor Freight accessories in the past, but none has made me as happy as this one's going to. These Harbor Freight hose clamps are about as useful as tying a shoelace around your dust collector. Don't buy them. If you get them for free, do this. This here's a slab o' walnut. The next project, we're gonna make some dust out of that and see if we can collect it. But it's gonna have to wait for another day. Till then, don't forget to like and subscribe. Any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. And above all else, stay safe, YouTube.